The alarm on my wrist buzzed twice before I even opened my eyes, and I knew someone was already inside the corridor outside my door. 3 heartbeats. That is all it takes to go from asleep to awake when you have spent years training your body to skip the part where most people panic. I rolled off the cot, grabbed my jacket from the floor, and pressed my back against the wall beside the doorframe. Through the thin metal I could hear boots. Not 1 pair. 3. My name is Cole. On the staffing exchange at Threnody Station, I was listed as the cheapest bodyguard on the board. 4 credits an hour. No bonus, no benefits, nothing fancy. 11 days ago, a 19-year-old girl named Saren Adaluthist walked past every expensive, heavily armored guard in the room and pointed straight at me. She said nobody watches the cheap one. She was right. Nobody had watched me in years. That was exactly how I liked it. Except now, on day 7 of an 11-day contract, 3 armed strangers were standing outside my door at 3 in the morning, and Saren's room was only 40 steps down the same corridor. I did not wait for them to knock. I slid the door open just enough to see 3 tall figures in unmarked armor, the kind that does not show up on a station scanner because someone paid a great deal of money to make sure it would not. They were Vren, broad-shouldered, moving with the quiet confidence of people who believed the fight was already over before it began. One of them was reaching for the access panel beside Saren's door. I stepped out into the corridor before they noticed me. The first one turned half a second too late. I caught his arm, twisted it away from his weapon, and used his own momentum to send him into the wall. He slid down without a sound. The second one was faster, already turning toward me with a stun baton raised, but I ducked under his swing and drove my shoulder into his chest before he could bring it down. He staggered back into a support strut and did not get up either. The third one hesitated. That hesitation cost him the fight before it started. I closed the distance, knocked the weapon from his hand, and pinned his arm behind his back until he dropped to his knees. He was still breathing hard when the corridor lights flared to full brightness, and station security came running from both ends of the hall. By the time the officers reached us, all 3 intruders were down, none of them seriously hurt, and I was standing calmly in the middle of the corridor, as if I had simply been out for a walk. The door behind me slid open. Saren stood there in her sleep clothes, eyes wide, staring at the scene in front of her. She looked at the 3 men on the floor, then at me, then back at the men again. "Who taught you to move like that?" she asked quietly. "Bad years," I said, which was true, and told her nothing at all. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The lead investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Nora Bellamy, arrived within minutes. She knelt beside the restraints on the unconscious Vren, ran a quick scanner over the pattern of the takedown, and went very still. She looked up at me with an expression I recognized immediately, because I had seen it before, years ago, on people who had just realized something they did not want to know. "This technique," she said slowly, "belonged to one unit. Only one. During the war they called the Reclamation. A lot of units fought in that war," I said. "One unit," she said, "that certain systems still tell stories about, to keep their children well behaved." I did not answer. There was no good answer to give. The Reclamation had ended 9 years ago, when several systems that had spent decades taking people who did not belong to them finally discovered exactly how far humanity was willing to go to bring its people home. I had spent every year since trying very hard to be a man that story was not about. Saren was watching me with new curiosity now, the kind that does not go away once it starts. "Cole," she said, testing the name as if it suddenly had another meaning hidden inside it. "That is not your full name, is it?" I still did not answer. But she was the heir to a compact with excellent archives of her own, and curiosity paired with diplomatic privilege is a dangerous combination at 3 in the morning. By the time the sun cycle on the station reset to daylight hours, she had found what she was looking for. By breakfast, so had everyone else on Threnody Station. I will not repeat the name here, because names carry weight, and this one had carried far more than I ever wanted it to. I will only say that when I walked Saren toward the final session of the Peace Summit that morning, the delegates in the hall did not look at her first. They looked at me. Guards who would have laughed at my hourly rate 3 days earlier suddenly stood straighter as I passed. An elder from a delegation that had never shown a single guard any respect in 11 days, rose from his seat and bowed low enough that his own aides looked startled. Somewhere behind us, a translator device malfunctioned and broadcast 3 words across an open channel before someone cut the feed. Saren said nothing until we were alone in the transit tube afterward, the station's dead star sliding slowly past the window beside us. "You could have told me," she said, not angry, just tired, the way people get tired when the world rearranges itself faster than they can keep up with it. "I could have," I agreed. "Then you would have hired me because of who I used to be. I wanted work where someone hired me for what I could do today, not for what happened 9 years ago." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "For what it is worth, I would have hired you anyway. I chose the cheapest guard because nobody watches the cheap one. I did not realize I had chosen the one everybody was already watching." 4 days left on the contract, I said. "You want to renegotiate the rate, Your Highness?" "No," she said, and for the first time that morning her smile reached her eyes. "I want to keep paying exactly 4 credits an hour. I like knowing precisely what I am getting for my money." I laughed, the first real laugh I had allowed myself in longer than I could remember. For a moment it felt like the story might simply end there, quietly, with 4 more days of easy work and a girl who trusted me more, not less, now that she knew the truth. It did not end there. That afternoon, Station Command called an emergency session. The 3 Vren who had tried to enter Saren's room were not simple thieves or wandering criminals, as everyone had first assumed. Under questioning, one of them gave up a name that made Nora Bellamy's face go pale. They had been sent by a faction within the Skarn delegation itself, a group that had never accepted the treaty being negotiated at the summit, and had decided that removing the heir of the Kestrel Compact would collapse the entire peace process before it could be signed. Saren took the news standing perfectly straight, her hands folded in front of her, but I noticed the way her knuckles had gone pale. "If they failed once," she said, "they will try again before the signing ceremony." "Probably tonight," I said. "They know the story is already spreading. They know you are more heavily watched now. That means less time for them to plan, and more reason to act quickly instead of carefully." Nora wanted to move Saren to a secure military transport and cancel the ceremony entirely. Saren refused. If the ceremony was cancelled, the faction would have won without lifting another weapon, and the fragile trust between 6 systems would collapse anyway. She looked at me instead of at Nora when she made the decision. "Can you keep me alive for 1 more day?" she asked. "I kept 400 people alive once," I said. "One should be easier." It was not easier. It was harder, because this time I had grown to care whether she made it through the day. The signing ceremony was scheduled for the following evening in the station's central hall, a wide chamber with a domed ceiling made of reinforced glass that showed the slow-turning stars outside. Every delegation would be present. Every camera on the station would be pointed at the same stage. It was the single most predictable place and time anyone could choose to strike, which was exactly why I did not trust it. I spent the day walking the hall from every angle I could reach, memorizing exits, checking maintenance shafts, testing which panels along the walls could be opened without triggering an alarm. Nora's officers thought I was being overly cautious. I had learned a long time ago that caution is the only thing standing between a quiet victory and a funeral. By evening, the hall filled with delegates in formal robes, aides carrying data pads, and reporters from a dozen systems angling for the best view of the stage. Saren stood near the podium in a deep blue formal dress, calm on the outside, in a way I had come to recognize as pure discipline rather than the absence of fear. I stood 2 steps behind her, exactly where a guard belongs, watching the crowd instead of the stage. The signing began smoothly. One by one, the delegation leaders stepped forward to place their mark on the treaty, each one accompanied by a short statement about peace and cooperation. I watched hands more than faces. Hands tell you what a person intends to do long before their face admits it. It was the 4th delegate, a quiet man near the back rows, who had said almost nothing during the entire summit, who reached beneath his robe half a second too slowly for me to mistake it for anything innocent. I moved before he could raise whatever he was carrying, closing the distance between us in 3 long steps, and pinning his arm to his side before the object in his hand could clear the fabric of his sleeve. It was not a weapon in the way I expected. It was a small device, already blinking with an activated countdown, meant to disable the station's environmental controls for the entire central hall. Not an attack meant to harm anyone directly, an attack meant to trap everyone inside a hall with failing air systems, while a second team, waiting somewhere outside, used the chaos to reach Saren through an exit nobody would think to guard during an evacuation. I understood the plan half a second after I disarmed the device, and by then, the second team was already moving. Two figures in station maintenance uniforms pushed through a side door that led directly toward the stage, moving fast, using the confusion of nearby guards reacting to the disarmed device as cover. Nora shouted a warning across the hall, but the distance between her officers and the stage was too great to close in time. I was closer. I stepped in front of Saren before either figure reached the stage, close enough that I became the only obstacle between them and her. The first one swung something hard toward my shoulder. I turned into it instead of away, absorbing the impact and using the same motion to redirect his balance into the second figure behind him. Both stumbled, and in the half-second that bought me, station officers finally closed the distance and took hold of both intruders before they could recover. The hall went silent, except for the low hum of the environmental systems, still running perfectly, never actually disabled. Saren stood exactly where she had been standing the entire time, unmoved, unharmed, her hand still resting on the treaty she had just signed. "Is it over?" she asked quietly, only to me. "For tonight," I said. "The faction behind this will not simply disappear because two of their people were caught, but the treaty is signed. That is what mattered most." She let out a breath I had not realized she was holding, and for the first time since I had met her, I saw something close to relief cross her face instead of discipline. The rest of the evening passed in the kind of careful, quiet aftermath that follows any crisis. Officers questioned the captured men, delegates whispered among themselves, and reporters scrambled to understand exactly what had happened in front of their own cameras without fully realizing it. Nora found me near the edge of the hall once the crowd had thinned. "You saved that entire room today," she said. "Not just her." "I did my job," I said. "4 credits an hour," she said, almost smiling despite everything. "I have never seen anyone get less paid for saving more lives." Now, I did not answer that either. Some things do not need an answer. Saren found me later, once the hall had emptied, and only a handful of station staff remained to clean away the remnants of the ceremony. She walked up beside me without any of her usual formality, simply standing there for a moment, looking out through the domed glass at the slow-turning stars. "They will write about this," she said, "about the treaty, about what almost happened, about you." "They can write whatever they want," I said. "I am not interested in being written about." "I know," she said. "That is exactly why I hired you." We stood there together in silence for a while, the kind of silence that does not need filling with words, before she finally turned to leave for the night. At the doorway, she paused and looked back at me. "4 more days on the contract," she said. "After that, what happens?" "After that," I said, "I go back to being the cheapest name on page 9 of the exchange board." "Somehow," she said, "I doubt that will work anymore." She was right, though I did not want to admit it that night. Word of what had happened on Threnody Station moved faster than any ship could travel, spreading system to system through news channels, private messages, and the kind of conversations that happen between people who cannot quite believe what they have heard. By the time my contract with Saren officially ended 4 days later, my name was no longer buried on the bottom of any exchange board. It had become something else entirely, something I had spent 9 years trying to leave behind, now standing in front of me again, whether I wanted it or not. On my last morning aboard the station, Saren met me at the transport bay, where a shuttle waited to take me back toward open space. She was dressed simply that day, without the formal robes of a diplomat, just a young woman saying goodbye to someone who had kept her alive through one of the hardest weeks of her life. "You do not have to disappear again," she said. "Not this time." "I have disappeared before," I said. "It worked well enough." "It worked because nobody knew what to look for," she said. "Now they do. Running will not help you the way it used to." I considered that for a long moment, watching the shuttle crew finish their final checks on the loading ramp behind her. "Then maybe I stop running," I said, surprising myself with how easily the words came out. She smiled, the same real smile I had seen once before in the transit tube, the one that reached all the way to her eyes. "The compact could use someone like you," she said, "not as a secret, as exactly who you are." 4 credits an hour, I said. "I think we can negotiate a better rate," she said, "now that everyone knows exactly what they are paying for." I stepped onto the shuttle ramp, pausing once to look back at her standing there against the wide curve of the station behind her, the same girl who had once pointed at the cheapest guard in a crowded room, simply because nobody would think to watch him. She had been right about that, once. She would not be right about it again, not anymore, and somehow that did not feel like something to mourn. The stars outside the viewport had not changed. The dead star still turned slowly at the center of the system, indifferent to names, indifferent to stories, indifferent to whatever the galaxy chose to remember or forget. But something in me had shifted all the same, quietly, the way real change usually happens, without announcement or ceremony. I had spent 9 years being nobody on purpose, hiding behind a low rate and a short name, hoping the galaxy would simply forget what I had once been. It had not forgotten. If anything, it remembered more clearly now than it ever had, whispered from station to station, system to system, carried by people who had seen with their own eyes what the stories had only hinted at. But for the first time since the reclamation ended, being remembered did not feel like a threat hanging over me. It felt like something closer to a beginning, one I had not asked for, but one I found, to my own quiet surprise, that I was finally ready to accept. The shuttle doors closed behind me, and as the engines hummed to life, I allowed myself one last look through the small viewport at Threnody Station shrinking behind us, at the girl who had hired the cheapest guard on the board and ended up changing the course of an entire treaty, and at the version of myself I was leaving behind on that station, the one who thought hiding was the same thing as being safe. I was wrong about that, it turned out. Being known was not the danger I had always believed it to be. Being known, when it was for the right reasons, standing beside the right people, could be something else entirely. It could be, simply, enough.